to our next episode. Very excited to be here. This is based on the top 2 Google search, how to make her come.
Yes, the second most searched thing in Google around sex is
How
how to make her come.
I have to say, that's so cool that there's that many people in the world that want women to have orgasm.
I agree.
Isn't that amazing? And that they want to learn. This is really important. So in this episode, we're going to talk about female orgasm and maybe describe it a little bit. In the explicit part, we're definitely going to share how to have that happen. But here I would love us, if you could take us, you've dealt with so many clients. A lot of them are anorgasmic or can only come with a vibrator, or if they're madly in love, or, you know, all of these things. So I'd love to explore from your perspective, your hands-on perspective, and I'll also share for me with my clients, and also a story about myself, because I remember the first time a guy asked me, did you come? And it was fairly early in my sex times. And I had, first of all, no idea what that meant, because I had never heard the word come before that question. So when you're very young and fresh, maybe
you're like, come where, go where?
I'm like, what? And then I felt in my body, I have to say yes. So I just said, yes. But I didn't know what he meant, and I didn't know if I did. And then I went on this search, like, oh gosh, well, what is this word come? And then my friends were like, oh, it means like, did you orgasm? I'm like, oh, I'm like, well, I actually don't know if I orgasmed. And then I remember sneaking into the library and like opening up an encyclopedia and trying to look up orgasm, and then reading the description, it didn't match my experience. So I'm like, oh, I guess I didn't come. And then for years, so I started being sexual around 18, and it wasn't until my mid-20s where I finally figured out that I was actually having orgasms, because the way I experience orgasm is so different in my body.
Well, I think that's a really important piece here. Is the question is misleading. How do you make a person come?
Yes.
So that's, I think, if you're trying to make yourself or make another person come, where that's like very goal oriented, then
Yes.
normally it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, yes, the definition that we have of orgasm, which is intermittent contractions over a certain period of time, normally for, I don't know,
in the base of the vagina.
15,
yeah.
Vaginal contractions, which is like your pelvic floor squeezing involuntarily. That's the kind of more strict definition of what an orgasm is. And frankly, that's also kind of the description of what happens when you are, let's say, using a vibrator on the clitoris. So something that's more clitoral-based stimulation, specifically as well. Tip of the clitoris glands, like external stimulation of the clitoris, will lead towards that type of sensation and orgasm, which a lot of people then go, okay, yes, I have had an orgasm, or no, I'm not, or I'm not experiencing other ones because the other ones don't feel like that. So then they write it off. Exactly.
So one of the things with the work I've done with women is have them define for themselves what orgasm is. Because sometimes our experience won't match anyone else, or any book, or any story. Or I've had so many different types of orgasms that sometimes they're once in a lifetime, they never happen again. And so by definition of orgasm, usually I define it as a change in felt state, so an altered state of awareness and consciousness that involves the body. There's pleasure involved, there's sensation of heat, or tingling, or expansion, or there's a lot of different bodily things. There can be contractions, pleasurable ones. Sometimes I've had almost uncomfortable levels of contractions. The orgasms are very, very intense. There could be a feeling of losing one's self, losing one's mind, losing sense of time. Could be really emotional, where I just start crying. So you can see that it's a sexual state that expresses itself through, I guess, arousal, and then these peak moments in arousal. And the reason I say peak moments in arousal versus the peak moment in arousal is because our bodies are capable to sustain orgasmic experience in states for long periods of time, but we've been sold to go for the one orgasm.
That then normally has this kind of peak experience and then a big drop off of don't stimulate me, or I don't feel anything, or this is uncomfortable even to be touched there.
And the other problem I have with how to make her come, even though I think it's a lovely desire, we need to be asking a different question. How can I give her the most extraordinary levels of pleasure? Or how can I give myself, if I'm solo, the most extraordinary levels of pleasure, with orgasm being a side effect of extraordinary levels of pleasure? Could you speak to that a bit?
Well, I mean, if you're thinking kind of that, an orgasm is this clitoral definition, then a lot of times you will ignore other things that can feel extremely pleasurable along the way and create this felt state change. The other thing too is that when you're so goal-oriented on that, then the whole journey up and towards the felt state change also gets ignored. And then also when you get fixated on when that shift happens, then you also miss out on how to kind of stay into that state and allow it to expand. Eventually, as you start to trust and become deeply in tune with following your pleasure, then it's something that you dance with, you court, you can meet it if it's very fiery at the beginning, or maybe it needs to kind of warm up slowly. But the big shift that ends up happening, though, is that you're walking side by side with it, nurturing it to become more aroused versus, oh, it's out there somewhere, I need to chase and find it, versus going, you know what, my body actually is in whatever state it's at, and I simply just need to activate it, as opposed to, I'm looking for this button that's going to give me this kind of magical sensation. So it becomes a more full-bodied experience. It also becomes much more meeting yourself where you're at and then enjoying the ride.
Yes.
And then allowing that to go wherever it is.
Because one of our mission points is to bring more beauty into the act of sex and joy and pleasure and playfulness, all this. Pursuing pleasure over orgasm, I think, is going to help people attain actually more orgasms, but actually more connection and more repeated desired interaction.
Yeah.
So sometimes I've had amazing sexual experiences and I don't orgasm, but I've had sustained pleasure for hours.
Yeah.
That's exquisite to me. And if at the end of all that you say, well, did you come? And then you're disappointed, I would be confused, because you just gave me a beautiful adventure into the land of pleasurable ecstasy. And okay, I didn't necessarily have a peak experience or even the other types of orgasms. There wasn't this thing that happened, but I'm in a felt state that's so extraordinary, so nourishing to my system, that I'm actually grateful and delighted for it.
Well, it also leaves you wanting more. Sometimes the type of orgasms that we classically want to go after are like, okay, I've had enough stimulation,
and they
stop now.
you.
You flatline, and you don't actually want to have more contact with that person.
Correct. So in the second half, I do want to share a very naughty experience I had at a dungeon.
Oh, wow.
Kind of sex-party dungeon.
That.
With two sex experts, like a porn star and someone else who, anyways, it was really, but it will show the very difference between a pleasure-based orientation orgasm, what happens to the body, and an orgasm that is a peak but flatlines.
Well, I think also to add to the part on the pursuit of pleasure and allowing that to be something that guides you requires, I think, something that I know a lot of my clients, and I've also heard you speak about your clients, is the part even before that, which is allowing or giving oneself permission to feel that pleasure, that, hey, this is okay, this is natural, I can trust it, it's not going to take me to these places that are going to wreak havoc in my social life or family life or whatever else.
Yes.
And so developing a different relationship to pleasure, one where you're allowed to permit yourself to actually become curious and feel what's there, and then allow those feelings to change. Because a lot of times we run into stuck sensations in the body that translate a lot of times to either old emotions that we've had or old permissions we didn't get, or maybe we'll have flashbacks of being told don't do this or don't do that. And when we can start to help with dissipating that simply by allowing it to be there and just continuing to revisit this area, and always again looking for and discovering, well, what is there, and just being okay with it,
Yes.
then naturally a lot of these things will start to change into pleasure. So some of the things that can come up with inhibiting our orgasm is needing to resensitize ourselves
So
either
physical limitation.
on a physical sensation because we're just numb, but also in a sense of maybe reframing, you could say, or even resensitizing our feelings around sex and how we relate to it, because we do have our own kind of cultural story or narrative that maybe is also holding ourselves back. And so this resensitization process at the beginning is as much about awakening the tissues to start to have a robust way of being able to be stimulated and finding sensation, as opposed to just doing it in one single way, is a big part of activating this. But secondly then is also then allowing yourself to go through the emotional spectrum or narrative or old stories that will start to that might start to surface if we allow ourselves to actually be really present with what it is that we're doing as we go into this exploration. This then will allow for two things, I think. One, we start to define pleasure and orgasm on our own terms, which is really important. As you were saying, you go, oh, I'm actually having all kinds of orgasms, and there are different kinds. They just weren't that exact one there, and I've had that too, but even then it's been from my own experience, and I'm the one that defines it more so than an external source. But then secondly, it also opens us up towards not just a creativity in terms of how we then also stimulate ourselves, but it opens us up to like different levels of kind of self-confidence inside ourselves as we then start to explore, start to feel that curiosity. That begins to happen, and so then we establish our own definition of what orgasm is, but we also start to develop our own techniques more naturally than having to get it, oh, I'm going to try this technique, this technique, this technique. Yes. Instead, it's like, oh, maybe this body motion or this kind of stimulation, you kind of switch your concept on what creates the stimulation, and all of a sudden you notice there's a whole new bag of moves in your bag to start to explore.
There's a big problem though, like the sex ed that's out there and telling people how to make a woman come, porn, all of these things. Unfortunately, when I have seen those things, I'm like, that would make me punch you in the face. If you touched me like that, I would hate it. And I'm extremely orgasmic, so I'm like really easy. If someone wants to give someone an orgasm and they've never done it before, I would be super easy. I mean, you almost like blow in my direction and I come. So the fact that these techniques shut me down, it's really, I want to stress that, because instead a masterful lover doesn't necessarily do something to a body. A masterful lover learns to listen, learns to evoke. And the thing that's going to create extraordinary pleasure and then perhaps even orgasm is to relax the body, assure the person. Most women, because this is a question about how to make her come, want to know that they're beautiful somehow, or that you find them attractive, or that I don't know, there's something they want, reflection of like, wow, you know, your pussy's so magnificent, or there's something that the psyche in the female psyche, because there's so much insecurity now with women looking at a lot of images of what supposedly a perfect sexual woman is, and she doesn't necessarily fit into that. Having reflection from her lover that they want to be there, they actually find her beautiful, they're actually excited by her body, they want to serve and give pleasure. These types of verbalized cues also can put the psyche at ease a little bit.
Yes.
So that's really important, one. And then two, the way a female body works is you need to start from the periphery in. And if you go instantly to the typical erogenous zones of her nipples, her clitoris, and then dive into the vagina, you're essentially robbing both parties of an extraordinary experience. So I'd love you to speak a little bit about the body as an erogenous zone and how when we're primed that way with more and more pleasure, it actually almost becomes super easy to bring someone to orgasm versus a trial and error.
Well, if you think about making somebody come, it normally starts with, oh, they're not aroused, I did something, and then they have an orgasm. As opposed to, how do we keep a person at a high state of arousal? How do we,
yes,
or for, let's say they're not aroused, and then you get them there, how do they stay into that state? So that way then, all of a sudden now, quickies aren't really a quickie because it maybe happens in that moment, and maybe it only goes for a short period of time, but it's been stewing the entire day. And this also really gets into that aspect of the mental arousal that, yes, there's a whole bunch of physical sensation, but when the psyche starts to play with the what if and how and where and when and all these type of things, all of a sudden you have the body creating this internal sort of, I don't even know what you call it, what do you call those, an engine that makes more energy than it requires to come in, a perpetual energy machine. There we go. Yeah. The perpetual energy machine, meaning that like the system itself is actually self-generating more arousal than it needs external stimulation, and you all of a sudden realize that the whole world is that way. Mm-hmm. Now, how does this practically happen? Starting from the periphery isn't even with our hands being our first touch, but our words are actually impacting the other person. There's two things I would say quickly on this. One is, what is the tone that we're speaking to?
Huge.
Ourselves?
Can you give us a couple different tone types with your voice?
Well, I mean, so if I'm talking more to you like this way, you can hear I'm a little bit more nasally and a little bit more in my head. It's going to be driving you up there, versus if I kind of sink a little bit more here into my chest and speaking from this space, versus if I also then start to really begin to really speak more from my genitals and allowing this sound to come through in my voice, it's going to literally create resonance, which is going to create reverberations in your body, and you will feel your body sinking down more towards this genital area, or maybe more towards the heart space.
I think some of us can actually orgasm just by vocal sounds.
And this is something that really chooses the partner is their voice.
Yeah, and the majority of women I've shared sometimes kind of erotic voice texts that were sent to me, for example, but the voice is just not right somehow. And the women are like, well, the words were kind of nice, but could not deal with the voice. Yeah. And that's because the person who did the recording of the erotic thoughts was in their head and not down in their genitals.
Yes, this isn't even just their voice compared to other person's voice. This is where are they at in their own voice range. Correct. Precisely. I think that's so important. And then the second thing is when you're aware of that tone, and then be aware this is also where you're creating focus in the other person's body. Well, what words are we using as well? Do we have a tendency to hide all the things that we're feeling? That is what happens a lot of times early on in relationships. Or we say things that aren't very intentional and then end up creating pain. Or what ends up happening, especially during the act of sex, we go silent. Yes. At a party, the people that creep you out are the ones that are quiet and in the corner, you know, like, because you're wondering, like, well, are they having a good time? What's going on here? So during a sexual experience, all of a sudden you've been talking, you've been interacting, you're having a great time, and then it just goes completely still, stone-faced. You're going to be wondering, what's this guy liking? What's going on?
Well, actually, it makes or breaks a connection. Yeah. So if that happens for, like, the first time sexual experience with a lover, and they do that, I will never have a repeat. It just doesn't work. Wow. I'm just like, no.
Well, then to make sure that doesn't happen, quick advice, some very easy things, because maybe the thought of talking during sex seems very challenging.
Talk, just make a sound of any kind of like vocal affirmation of some kind of pleasure.
So like you have your moan, you know, like it's like like allow yourself to be expressive. Probably those deeper tones is where you're going to be feeling the sensation, so allow them to also resonate in that same place. Yeah. But I would also say too, if you do want to add in some words, which can actually help guide the other person's mind if you're going in your head and wondering, do they like this, is simply 3 basic things. What you want, what you like, what you feel.
Let's do that even more in the how section of the
Oh, okay.
podcast.
All right. Well,
But
then we'll save that
definitely
there.
like that. So repeat that again.
It's being able to speak about the things that you like,
Mhm.
what it is that you're actually feeling in the moment, and what you want more of.
Yes, we'll definitely do a dirty talk episode. I think it's going to be.
It could definitely go into the dirtier version, but frankly, it also doesn't have to be that dirty. Literally, it could be like, oh my God, this feels, but yeah, we'll go into it there.
Exactly.
I think it gets a little bit more dirty when you start telling the other person, you like how that feels?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, that playfulness. But there's been also, I find, and a lot of women will respond to eye contact. And some women do not like to be looked at with lust.
Yeah.
And some women absolutely need it.
And
So,
some want to be looked at with lust when they're in the state of high arousal,
yes.
but not beforehand. It doesn't start them.
Yeah. So it's a sensitivity. Eyes penetrate.
Mm-hmm.
Your voice tone penetrates
Mhm.
long before you ever touch. So you are already in the act of arousing or turning off
Yeah.
by your mindset. So if you want to make a woman come, like you need to be in a mindset that's really connected to yourself. You're feeling turned on. You're feeling like connected with her, with life. There's an issue of connection. But if you're there obsessing, like how to make her come, and you're disconnected,
She's going to be obsessing about that
and it's
or
also
something else.
like
It's just nervous energy.
at least it shut me down. Like someone's trying to make me come. I'm like, okay,
They're
let's
not
just.
actually connecting to where you're at.
They're
They're
not
connecting to
with
like
me.
where they
They're
want you
with
to
a
go.
goal. They're not with me, and like we'll get there. Don't worry about that. Like let's be here now. So I think all these elements, these preparatory elements, are overlooked. We think it's a magic button we need to do, and then we
Well,
press
that button
it.
conversation as well, that it's primarily orgasm happens because of the point of contact between the finger, penis, strap on, whatever, and whatever it's touching, as
Yeah.
opposed to having full body contact,
Yeah.
having like that sense of unity and connection, the feelings of actually like some weightlessness to help with this sense of surrender. There's lots of different factors I think that we'll be able to go into in the second part
Yeah.
on how to assist with coming, whether this is for yourself on your own or if you are then with a partner. But I guess the question is though, how do you make her come? So it
Yeah,
would
the
be-
question on how to make her come is the second highest most asked question in Google around sexuality, which is lovely. But women are not just clitorises. We are erotic beings. Our minds want to be touched. Our essence wants to be touched. Our hearts want to be touched. And I'm not saying you have to romanticize every one night stand, but having a sense of intimacy just with yourself and bringing that into the connection, it allows a person to feel more intimate. And that's actually good. It's a good thing.
So the general answer then I would say is take the time to become curious and really learn the other person's body. And if there's anything that you do, it's helping them to become more active physically
Yes.
and more expressed vocally as well as like mentally, what kind of fantasies things bring them online. So that way then you see what is sort of the treasure map that's laid out towards their pleasure, and then have journeys adventuring into different edges of it. And just that desire to explore and be curious, this is the best starting point.
Best advantage too, because if
That
you
can lead
come
to
in
coming.
with a recipe of, I made all these women come, I'm going to make her come too, it may not work. And then you'll blame her, and then she'll think something's wrong and actually walk through life thinking she's broken orgasmically, which is not something you want to leave someone with.
And the key to, I think, when you get really to a place of mastery is it's not, did this work, but it's like, well, specific to this person, how did that work or not work?
Yeah.
And how can I even get whatever I've done a million times become even more amazing with this person because their body works with it in this particular way. So it's like keeping that glass half full.
Yes. Okay, so I think we should pop into the more explicit part of the conversation.
All right.
To join us for the complete and explicit version of this podcast, just simply upgrade your membership and you'll get instant access.